national hero.
Mhm.
You know, someone whose courage, whose leadership was absolutely vital to their country winning its independence.
Mhm.
A popular leader, principled, unafraid to speak their mind. Now, picture that same hero, not celebrated, but locked away for decades.
It's a powerful image.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's the story at the heart of this biki production.
Mhm.
We're doing a deep dive into the life of Bitweded Abraha of Eritrea.
Yeah, and our mission here really is to carefully unpack the sources you've shared with us. We've got articles from Human Rights Concern Eritrea, reports from David Alton, Jubilee Campaign USA. There's a Reddit post about his speech, Amnesty International, Relief Web, the International Bar Association, and Human Rights Watch.
Right.
Quite a range.
A lot to work with.
Definitely. And the goal is to pull out the key insights from these materials, strictly based on them, and trace Bitweded Abraha's journey, from this celebrated freedom fighter to a man who spent, well, over 30 years in detention, according to these accounts.
And these materials, they really do tell a compelling story. Tracing his life from birth, his rise in the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF,
Right.
his critical role after independence, the conflicts that started cropping up, and then these decades, just decades of imprisonment.
And the human rights concerns that weave through it all. International reactions, too.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Where does the story begin according to these sources?
Okay, so the story kicks off, based on these documents, with his birth in Asmara, specifically the Edaga Hamas area back in 1953.
Okay.
His parents were Otto Abraha Asfaha and Waizero Kidistituel Demedin. Schooling started in Asmara, then he went to Mendefera, finished secondary at St. George Secondary School.
And even back then, as a student, the materials suggest he was already involved?
Yeah, seems so. Underground work for the EPLF right there in Mendefera while still in school. And then there's this moment around 1972 that really seems, well, defining. He applied for a job, didn't get it, at a Japanese mining company in Debarwa.
And his reaction?
He wrote them a letter, a pretty pointed one, from what a friend later recalled in one source.
Pointed how? What did it say?
Well, the friend warned him, you could be imprisoned for this. But Bitweded's reply, which is quoted, is incredibly defiant. He said something like, "Even if I am imprisoned, the truth will never be imprisoned. Moreover, you should know that whoever puts me in prison will never sleep in peace."
Wow. That's quite a statement for a young man.
It is. The letter itself, as detailed, basically challenged the company, suggesting they'd forgotten the land belonged to Eritreans and that the truth would come out.
And the friend's warning?
Yeah.
Did it come true?
It did. He was briefly imprisoned about 2 weeks, then released on bail.
Okay.
But he never showed up for the hearing. The sources link this to his underground work, recruiting students for the armed struggle. Apparently, after 2 students he reported him, he left town before the hearing date.
And joined the EPLF officially?
Yep. January 1973, he formally joined the armed struggle.
And his rise within the EPLF?
Mm-hmm.
The sources suggest it was pretty quick.
Seems that way. Military training, fighting in key areas like Sahel, the Southern Highlands. By early 77, he's a political commissar. Then, after the first EPLF Congress, he gets voted in as a non-permanent member of the Central Committee.
Impressive. And he held other positions, too.
Yeah, head of the Department of Transport, later deputy head of education. He was clearly moving up.
What do the sources say about his leadership style? What made him stand out?
Well, he's described as, a talented leader who really believed in education and awareness over just strict military discipline. He didn't think punishment was the best way.
Interesting approach in a liberation front.
Right. He actively pushed for things like sports and cultural programs. And this approach, it seems, made him really popular, especially with the fighters, the younger generation.
You can see how that would resonate.
Exactly. And you see the impact mentioned, particularly at the revolution schools. He reportedly shifted the focus away from criticism and self-criticism, which could be quite harsh, towards teaching kids about love, responsibility, respect. Apparently, this innovative approach was met with, well, great enthusiasm.
So developing people through understanding, not just orders.
That seems to be the core idea highlighted. Changing methods by prioritizing education. He led the EPLF's big illiteracy eradication campaign in '83. He also represented the Central Committee behind enemy lines, a really tough assignment.
And he wasn't some distant figure in an office.
No, the sources emphasize that. He traveled widely, visited all the fronts, boosting morale, didn't keep his distance from the lower ranks. Being younger might have helped him connect better with the ordinary fighters, understand their needs.
Resourceful too, I gather.
Very much so. When he moved to the military section handling supplies, he pushed for self-reliance. The materials mention projects like rearing animals, selling them in Sudan to get funds for basics like pens and pencils. He integrated this into bigger programs.
Practical stuff.
Yeah, setting up training sessions, even using TV and video for education, and, well, a bit of entertainment too.
So you get this picture of a dynamic, popular leader involved in all sorts of things. Then comes independence in 1991.
Right. The sources note he returned to the military section in 1990, leading a commando unit. And crucially, he, along with Gerzgir and Mariam Luchu, led the force that captured the port of Assab. A huge strategic win.
A major contribution. And after independence.
He was stationed in Assab, deputy administrator officially, but the sources say he was pretty much running the region, Dankalia, overseeing both military and civilian stuff.
And this is where things start to get difficult with the new leadership.
Yeah, this period marks a definite increase in tension, specifically with Isaias Afwerki, who is leading the new state. A key point from the sources is how Bitweds' core trait, speaking his mind, not backing down easily, became a major source of friction.
Right, that defiance we saw earlier.
Exactly. And the materials detail several specific disagreements right after May 1991.
Like what?
Well, opposing Ethiopia getting free access to Assab port without proper consultation. Apparently, he also reminded Isaias about an earlier strategic mistake concerning Badme back in '84.
Ouch. Probably didn't go down well.
Likely not. He also reportedly refused orders to return captured assets, arguing, they were won with Eritrean blood. The sources frame this as a direct challenge to Isaias' authority, sparking efforts to undermine him.
And there was something about salaries.
Yes. Ethiopia offered to pay salaries for Assab port and refinery workers. Bitweded apparently refused, insisting Eritrea, as an independent state, had to manage its own finances. He wanted proper state-to-state relations based on standard terms, not dependency.
Standing on principle.
Seems so. Then there's the whiskey incident. Eritrea was short on cash, so Bitweded proposed selling captured whiskey to Ethiopia to raise funds for salaries, institutions, maybe even give some bottles to the fighters.
Okay.
And this idea was reportedly approved by Ramadan Mohammed Noor, another top official.
There's always a but.
Well, despite that approval, the sources suggest Isaias and Ethiopia's leader, Meles Zenawi, later signed an agreement giving Ethiopia unrestricted port use anyway. Bitweded voiced his dissatisfaction again, pushing for standard international agreements.
So he kept speaking out.
He did. And the sources mention the Ethiopian government wasn't comfortable with his independent stance. There were even reports of Isaias and Meles discussing these inconveniences he was causing.
So the stage was set.
It seems that way. This whole situation, according to the materials, allowed that initially approved whiskey sales proposal to be twisted into an accusation unverified that Bitweded had embezzled funds for personal gain.
And that became the reason for his arrest.
That was the accusation used for his imprisonment in October 1991, based on that unverified claim.
And the way it happened. The secrecy is just shocking, isn't it?
It really is a truly harrowing part of the story in these sources. For months, his family, even his own army unit, they were kept completely in the dark, told he was studying abroad. Yeah, and the sources suggest the real reason, behind the scenes, was his popularity, especially among the fighters. It was seen as a potential threat to Isaias Afwerki consolidating his power.
So the whiskey thing was just a pretext.
That's the implication in the materials. Damage his name, remove a potential rival. But the accusation itself didn't stick, apparently, because there just wasn't any evidence.
And his family? What did they do?
Oh, the sources paint a devastating picture of their struggle, just relentless efforts to find out what happened to get justice. His father, Ato Abraha Asfaha, appealed directly to Isaias again and again.
What happened?
Empty promises of release, constant delays, just stringing him along, it seems.
Did the father try other avenues?
He pleaded for a proper court trial. He highlighted his son's integrity, his service, even offered, to get community help to pay any fines if he was actually found guilty of embezzlement.
But
Instead, reports say he was mistreated by security officers, turned away, denied access.
Heartbreaking.
It is. He did manage to meet some officials reportedly involved, like Petra Solomon and Ali Said Abdallah. Their responses, as recounted, were all over the place. Sometimes dismissive, saying it was temporary, sometimes contradictory, like he's dearer to us.
Contradictory is putting it mildly.
Right. And sometimes blaming Bitweded's obstinacy, even weirdly linking it to his father. One account uses the chilling phrase that he was imprisoned for the sake of it.
Just arbitrary cruelty.
The father's pain is captured in this quote after seeing his son's condition in prison. He said, "I saw my son after he survived all that hell and he got imprisoned just before I could see him for the third time. It is not fair. And all this for the flag he fought for. May you not be bitten by a dog you raise."
Oh, that's just devastating.
And tragically, Abraha died from grief in September 1993. He never saw his son released.
So the burden fell on his mother.
Yes. Waziro Kadisti Tualdemedin. She bravely took up the search. She knew many fighters, used her connections, appealed repeatedly. She spoke to Sabat Ephraim, for instance.
Did that help?
Initially, maybe some hope. But later, Sabat Ephraim reportedly told her bluntly, it was Isaiah's direct orders. She even met Isaiah himself in 1998.
What did Isaiah say?
Acknowledged her son was a hero, apparently, but said he was in prison for not respecting us. Promised a quick release again.
Another empty promise.
Seems so. 6 months later, she tried to see Isaiah again and was denied entry. And the sources recount this powerful moment where she shouted at a guard who tried to push her, "Don't touch me, you ignorant! My son is not like you."
Wow. Fierce.
Absolutely. She kept appealing to others, like Mahmoud Sharifo. There's an account of her questioning him, challenging the delays, defending her son's supposed obstinacy as being for the country, questioning the state of the nation. Really powerful stuff.
Did Sharifo do anything?
It's noted he did apparently raise the case in a high-level meeting chaired by Isaiah, but Isaiah just dismissed it.
There's no way through.
It seems not. And then her final illness, her dying wish was just to see her son. They took her on a stretcher to the prison gates, according to the sources. Still denied.
Unbelievable cruelty.
Waziro Kadisti died in 2000. Never saw him again. Her funeral was huge, showing the family standing. The sources capture the grief, her brother crying out for Bitweded to come say goodbye. It's just... this whole story of the family's ordeal really highlights the personal cost.
Beyond comprehension. And his own immediate family. His wife and daughter.
Yeah, the impact hit them hard, too. He'd married in 85, had a daughter in 89. She grew up without him. And the sources state his wife eventually left him, left the country, after years of waiting and uncertainty.
Fought for his country's freedom, lost his own, and his family suffered immensely.
That's the tragic irony laid bare in these accounts.
But then the story takes another turn. The sources mention an escape in 1995.
Yes, astonishingly. With help from a former student from his Revolution School days, he hid out at his godfather's house.
Did he try to leave the country then? He had the chance, right?
He did. The sources make a point of this. He could have crossed the border to safety, but he chose not to. His belief in his homeland, his love for it, kept him there.
That's a remarkable loyalty given everything.
It really is. He even tried to engage with the leadership again, called Isaiah, asked for a meeting. Isaiah reportedly didn't show.
So what happened?
He met with several other officials instead. Sharifo, Petro Solomon, Hailwold, Tensei, others talked for a few hours, clarified his case, and then, in this extraordinary detail from the sources, he apparently told them they could take him back to prison.
He told them to take him back.
That's what the account says, and they did.
Incredible. Even back in prison, did he just give up?
No, not at all. The sources mention he actually wrote 2 books while confined. One called Democracy in Eritrea, arguing against dictatorship. Another, Civil War and its aftermath, reflecting on the costs of power struggles.
Wow.
He even included this poignant reflection on the first woman martyr of the Civil War, questioning if her sacrifice was really honored by how things turned out.
Still thinking, still analyzing, even in there.
Exactly. And he made a prediction, apparently. He said he'd be released when war eventually broke out with the Woyane, meaning Ethiopia.
And was he right?
He was. War did break out and he was released. The specific date seems to be December 1997, based on the more detailed accounts, although one source mentions May 97. Let's stick with December 97.
Okay, December 1997. He's released. But it wasn't straightforward, was it? There was a court appearance.
Right, December 24th, 1997. This moment really highlights his commitment to principle, to the rule of law he fought for. He's brought before a special court. Judges, military colonels, brigadier generals tell him he's being released.
And his response?
Absolutely defiant. The source quotes him saying something like, "I am not a dog that you can order to come in or go out. I am a veteran fighter. You cannot tell me to come in or go out without a rule of law. State the crime I committed or make it clear I committed no crime. Put it in writing. Otherwise, bring new judges or send me back to prison."
He chose prison again. Over release, it wasn't legally sound.
Yes. He refused to accept freedom unless it was done properly, according to the law. The officials consulted, and the source says they told him, in accordance to his choice, he'd go back to his cell. And he did.
Unwavering.
Truly. But later that same morning, still December 24th, they took him to Beleza to meet Major General Sebhat Ephraim.
And that was the formal release.
Yes. Sebhat Ephraim formally told him he wasn't guilty of any crime, gave him a written promise of his unpaid salaries, compensation. Then they took him to the Hamassin Hotel. He was officially free.
So, finally out. How long did this period of freedom last?
Not long, just from December 97 to March 98. A few months.
And what did he do at that time? Lie low?
Absolutely not. He used that freedom to speak out, embodying the very principles that got him into trouble in the first place. He went to his father's grave, gave this powerful speech to the villagers there.
What was his message?
Talking about democracy, the need to keep struggling for rights, he directly challenged the government's lies about the financial charges, emphasized the role of the youth, urged people not to be fooled, keep fighting. He spoke to a big crowd in December too, similar message.
So openly campaigning, essentially.
Yes. The sources say he was openly discussing the rising dictatorship, showing evidence, trying to clear his name, and sharing his predictions about Isaiah's direction.
And that wasn't tolerated.
No. According to the sources, this public dissent, just months after his release, was seen as a major threat. Isaiah was reportedly unhappy, feared it could spark an uprising.
So he was arrested again.
Exactly. March 1998. Rearrested, along with some people known to sympathize with him, and according to these sources, he's been in prison ever since.
Ever since March 1998. That's staggering.
It is. The sources give different figures for the total time, but it's decades, over 30 years since the first arrest in 91. And a key detail is that he's reportedly been held in solitary confinement since 1994, so during the first imprisonment, and then continuously since the 98 rearrest.
And his condition. Do the sources say anything?
They describe it grimly. Kept in a hole like a fox, neglected, in a very poor state.
And still, after all this time,
Yeah.
never charged, never tried.
That's the core injustice hammered home in all these materials. Never charged with a crime, never brought before a court, never convicted. The man who fought for rule of law denied it completely by the state he helped build. It starkly shows what happens when power isn't checked by justice.
Has the international community reacted?
Yes, there's been condemnation. The sources highlight the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention's findings from November 2018 specifically.
What did they find?
Unequivocally that his detention is arbitrary, unlawful, violates fundamental rights under international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Things like the right to challenge detention, the right to be free from solitary confinement, right to trial without delay, right to defense, fair trial, all violated.
Did they demand anything?
They gave clear instructions to the Eritrean government. Remedy the situation without delay. Conform to international law. Release him immediately. Provide compensation and reparations.
And has Eritrea complied?
No. The sources consistently point out Eritrea's lack of compliance, its refusal to cooperate with UN human rights mechanisms, even while sitting on the Human Rights Council from 2019 to 2024.
That's quite the contradiction.
It is. And Bitweded Abraha's case, as presented here, is really placed within this wider context of severe human rights issues in Eritrea, documented by HRW, Amnesty, the IBA, and others.
What kind of issues?
Widespread arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, no due process, severe restrictions on all freedoms, impunity for abuses. Amnesty describes horrific torture methods, names like the helicopter Jesus Christ #8, just brutal.
It sounds systematic.
Plus, harsh prison conditions, indefinite forced national service, collective punishment of families, religious persecution, even reaching across borders to repress the diaspora. It's a bleak picture.
And Bitweded Abraha is a symbol of this.
A prominent, tragic example, according to these sources, described as one of the tyrant Isaiah Afwerki's many thousands of prisoners, without advocacy, without a voice. His continued imprisonment is seen as proof of the government's refusal to allow any free speech.
And organizations are still calling for his release.
Yes. HRCE, David Alton, Jubilee Campaign, Amnesty, the IBA. The calls for his release and for accountability based on these documented injustices are ongoing.
So bring this deep dive together then, based strictly on these sources. The story of Bitweded Abraha is one of a celebrated national hero.
Absolutely. Principled, popular, crucial for independence.
Who then became a victim of the state he helped create, essentially because he spoke his mind and was popular.
That's the narrative presented. Decades locked away, mostly in solitary, never charged, never tried, never convicted, a complete denial of the rule of law he championed.
Despite international condemnation, nothing changes. It's a stark illustration of justice denied when power is unchecked.
Definitely. So what can you, the listener, take away from this story as told in these materials? It's a powerful, very personal look at how fragile justice is without the rule of law. It shows the immense personal cost of speaking truth to power in that kind of system. And it really underscores why human rights advocacy matters so much, especially for those silenced, hidden away.
And that final statement from the sources. Bitweded lives. What does that mean? His story, the principles he stood for, democracy, justice, the things he wouldn't compromise even for freedom.
Right. What does it mean for those things to live on even while he's physically confined?
And what responsibility does knowing his story as presented here place on you?
Something to reflect on for sure.
This has been a Biki production.